Welcome back to Chapter 11, Session 3. In this section, we're going to go ahead and finish up our project and talk about a couple function options that we have in JavaScript. Let's get started. When we say that JavaScript is object-based, one of the things that you can do with that is that you can treat anything like an object, even a function. May have a hard time visualizing the concept of functions as objects, but functions can do the same thing objects can. You can store it in a variable, you can store it as an object property, you can use a function as a parameter in a second function, you can nest functions inside of each other, you've seen that. You can return a function as the result of another function, and you can modify properties of a function that are already created. So these are all things that you can do with regular objects. You can also do them with functions. So one of the things that we do is we can use functions as we go along as though they were objects. Generally, when we create a function, we use the keyword function. We give it a name of some type. We open and close parentheses, maybe put some parameters in there. We use curly braces, and then we add the commands, whatever the text is of the actual function. That's how a normal function declaration works. Funny thing is, you can also use a function operator. So a function operator uses the keyword function, doesn't have a function name. It adds parentheses the same way you normally would, and curly braces and commands, but it's used on the right side of an assignment. So in the assignment, we put variable hello, like we have a variable, like we normally would, and we set it equal to this function. Now I can call the function by using the word hello. This is a kind of weird way of doing it, but you'll see in a minute why this is really useful. We can create what are called anonymous functions. An anonymous function is kind of the opposite of a named function. So all the functions we've done so far are named functions. We've given them a function name. So function foo is a function name, and then we do our regular functions. Anonymous functions are built through that operator I just showed you, and they don't have a name directly. The function doesn't. If you assign it to a variable, the variable is now the name of the function. But you don't have to always assign it to a variable. You can assign it to an event handler or an event listener. This is really convenient when you're doing event-based programming, where you want to handle your event listeners and your event handlers with anonymous functions, because you don't really want to create your own function name and clutter up your code with that. You want the function declaration to be right in the same place that you're doing the listener. You don't want it to be somewhere else in your code that you have to go find it. So you can put it in as an anonymous function or an unnamed function in your code. So by applying these to the right-hand side of the event handler, it saves you a little bit of effort. You can apply parameters in anonymous functions. So you can say, this is my anonymous function, and instead of using function open and close parenthesis, you can do function open parenthesis e close parenthesis, and then be able to reference the event through your code the same way you normally would. Remember, this is also an option. You can also use local variables in anonymous functions. So the last of the three examples here, we have a function initialize, and then we have a message text that's a local variable inside of our function init. Inside of init, we have a on-click event handler, and that on-click event handler says function, and it passes into the function that message text that was local inside of our code. So we can run the alert against that code. So those variable options are available as well. Anonymous functions can be very, very useful, but if you start to get frustrated or annoyed with anonymous functions, like you aren't understanding them or getting them, it's okay for most of the assignments to not do them, to go ahead and name your functions and use them that way. Anonymous functions are really great when you work with different languages, like function first languages, kind of like F#, or C#, any of the other languages like that, because they do allow you to write code inline rather than having a separate function elsewise. We're going to use an anonymous function to add the code for the show solution button. So we're going to come down to our initialize function, or up, it's probably on the top, and we're going to add an event listener for our show solution. So let's add an event listener for show solution. Okay, so document, add event lister. I'm sorry, document get element ID. By ID. And we're going to look for the solve button. We could go back over to our Hanji to make sure that we knew what the button was, but as you can see, its ID is solve or peak. So those are the two that we're going to do in this section. So solve, and then we're going to add an event lister. And this event listener is going to be the on-click event. So in this case, we don't say on-click, we just say click. And we put it in quotes because it's going to be the click event. And then we put our comma. Now, we're going to go ahead and add our anonymous function at this point. So I'm going to move my mouse so that gives away. And you can see I did my comma, and I still have my semicolon or my parenthesis, closing parenthesis that I put down here. And then I just added a couple of spaces just to make it easier. I like to tab things in, make them easier for me to understand. In this case, I'm going to go ahead and add my function, my anonymous function, with my curly braces. So as you can see, I did function without a function name with just an open and closed parenthesis. And that's all that's necessary for this function to tell it because it's an anonymous function. Inside of my anonymous function, I'm going to go ahead and remove the inline background color style from every cell. That's going to allow the solution to show up, and then we can see whether or not we have the solution right. So I'm going to do another one of these wonderful for loops that you should be so bored with seeing by now. With a var I equals 0. I is less than, anybody want to guess? My puzzle cells length and I plus plus. Another curly braces. And inside of here, I'm going to say puzzle cells I. So it'll go through and do each one. Dot style. Dot background color. And I'm going to set that equal to nothing. So I'm actually removing the background color altogether. I'm not setting it to white. I'm not setting it to black. I'm just setting it to nothing so that no background color is attached to those styles anymore. Okay. So this is going to be an anonymous function attached to my show solution. When I hit save and run, I can click show solution here. And it will go ahead and remove that yellow background that we had done. So I can come back over, show solution, removes that yellow background. I can do the same thing with puzzle 2, and it removes the background. I can go back to puzzle 2 and open it back up. So the show solution now is going to show us our solution. We're now going to create a couple of local variables to hold which cells should be filled and which cells should be empty. So when we declare those, we're going to do them inside of our setup. Usually when I start to get this much code, I'll go ahead and start closing things up just to make it easier for me to find things that I want. So this one is going to be inside of my setup. And you see how I can just do that where all I'm looking at is my setup and I won't get myself confused as to where I'm going. I'm going to allow my 3, 4 things in my for loop here, and I'm just going to put this down at the bottom here, and I'm going to just go ahead and create a couple of variables, filled and empty. These are going to use my query selector all to get everything that is in the table, hashtag Hanji grid, and then inside of that, I want my TDs with a class of filled. Let me make sure that you can see that. Close that up so you can see it a little better. Okay, so just like a selector for a CSS, query selector, table, hashtag, Hanji grid, so specifically the one named Hanji grid, and then the TDs that are filled. I'm also going to create an empty, spelled wrong, there we go, equal to document, query select for all, with table, table, hashtag, Hanji grid. And then I'm going to do a TD with empty. So When these go through, these two variables are going to be filled up with all of the cells that should be filled and all of the cells that should be empty. I'm going to be able to use that information to determine if any of the cells are incorrect, because we're going to use our little peek to help us to do that. Okay, now we have to do an event listener for our peek. So if we're going to do our peek. In our peek, we're going to do our event listener, again, still in our setup puzzle. And it's important to go ahead and do it in the same place, because you need to be able to access those variables. Okay, so here I'm going to do create an event listener to highlight incorrect cells. And you can be incorrect in two different ways. You can be something you think is empty that is not empty, and you can have something that you think is full that is empty. So two different directions that you can go here. So first we're going to add our event lister, document, get element by ID, and we're going to go find our peek element, because that's the one that we're going to be attaching the event listener onto for our on-click event. Add event listener, again, click with a comma. I'm going to go ahead and do another anonymous function down here. We're going to do a function, open, close. Okay. What am I going to do when you click this? Well, rather than have a show solution function, which I could have done, we're going to do this in an anonymous function. So everything that's going to go inside this line 127 of mine is going to be the code that we need to highlight the incorrect cells. Okay, two different things we need to check. We need to display any incorrect white cells in pink and display any incorrect gray cells or dark cells in red. So two different ways that we're going to loop. We're going to actually loop twice. So we're going to display them, or handle both of them on their own. So let's start with our incorrect white cells. So display incorrect white cells in pink. You're going to see this is going to make things really easy, because I can actually do a little bit of copy and pasting by separating these into two different things. So I'm going to do another for loop. Oh my gosh, really? Another for loop? What a crazy idea. I equals 0. I is less than, oh my gosh. Puzzle cells, dot length, I plus plus. Okay. Inside here, I'm going to say if. Okay. If the filled index of the one I'm supposed to look at, background color of that element is 255. 255. So if it's white, then set the background color to pink. So what we're doing is saying we're going to go through, I'm sorry, we weren't supposed to do puzzle cells. We were going to do filled. See, I got all aggressive, and that's just not how it's done. So we're going to go through the filled array first. For each of the ones in filled array, if the background color of this one is white, that means you marked it wrong, and we're going to change it to pink. So if filled I style background color is equal to RGB 255, 255, 255, quotes, then curly braces, filled I style background color is equal to, and I could just say pink, but I'm going to do a specific color, RGB of 255, 211, 211. Close parenthesis, semicolon. Okay, so what that said, go through the entire filled array. All of the ones that were up here, these are all the ones that should have been filled, because when we built our draw puzzle down here, we came through and we looked and we looked and we went all the way down here, and it said if it was supposed to be filled, give it the class of filled, otherwise give it the class of empty. That's where we got that information from. Close that back up. So that's where we got our filled and empty for this section here. So Go through the whole thing. If it's supposed to be filled and it isn't filled, so it's white, go ahead and set it to pink. Do the exact same thing for the empty. Now, if you're going to copy and paste this, which I actually recommend you don't, I can because I'm me and I tend to know which ones I'm looking for. But generally, I would say don't, because you're going to make mistakes on which ones you have to change. So display, incorrect. Gray cells in red. Okay, I'm going to look through here. This should be empty. This should be empty. This should be empty. Now, if they were gray, then it's not 255, 255, 255. It's 101, right? 101, 101, 101. But we don't want to set those to pink. We want to set them to red. So we're going to do the red version, 255, 101, 101. Okay. The reason why I recommend not copying and pasting there is because you had to change 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 things. And if you missed any one of those things, you would have gotten in trouble. That's okay. If you want to copy and paste and you're really careful about it, it's fine, but you just got to be careful. Okay. At this point, we have created our event listener for an on-click event for our peak thing, and it's going to change our colors. Okay. I'm going to let you in on a little secret before we refresh this. And this is a frustrating secret that will probably drive you crazy if this is something that you do. In this code that is going to compare the background color. Now I can look down here and I can see that every time I put in a background color here, I did not use any spaces. Why did I not use any spaces? I don't know. Sometimes I do, sometimes I don't. In this case, apparently I didn't. Do not use any spaces in this case. However, when the code is applied to the browser will create a string that has spaces between the different 255 values. Why it does this, why it doesn't look at them the same, I'm not 100% sure. But in this case, if you had done 255, 255, 255 without the spaces in there, it would not work. Now you can set it back to this, and that's fine. That doesn't have a problem. But for some reason, it doesn't like the spaces. So when you get to this section, if you are doing a comparison between background colors, make sure you have the spaces in there. Okay, so let's go ahead and refresh this. Now, if I hit peek, it's not going to say anything because the point of peek is not to show you the solution. That's this one. The point of peek is to take whatever you have done and flip colors if you have them wrong. So if I mark the whole thing in gray and select peek, it's going to show me that these were supposed to be white because that was the lighter color. So that's the red. At the same time, if I did this and I did the whole thing in white, where I did something like that, and then I said peek, it's going to show me in that pink things that are white that are actually supposed to be gray. This makes a lot more sense when you actually play the game and you go, okay, this needs to be 5 and this needs to be 5. So we're going to go 5 and 5. This needs to be 4. Well, there's 1. So let's do 4 like that. This needs to be 3. So let's do that. That needs to be 2 and that needs to be 1. So we're going to check that as our solution. We're going to say peek and it's going to say, oh, wait, these are the ones that are supposed to be white that you made dark. So again, if I do something like this, and then I do that, and then I make white all of my other ones. So I think this is my solution. I don't know why I think this is my solution, but I just do. Then you'll see everything that was wrong, they'll mark. So the white ones, they leave white because those were correct. The dark pink or the red are ones that are supposed to be white, but are currently black, and then vice versa. Now you'll notice there's no way for peek to go away when I'm done with it. We have to fix that code next. So to add that, we are going to set a timeout function. The timeout function is going to say only peak for a half a second. So 500 milliseconds, that's all we're going to do. And we are going to add this timeout inside of our setup puzzle. So we're still in our setup puzzle. Everything's still good. We're going to come in here after we've done our peak click. We're going to go ahead and set our timeout. Directly after the for loop, that marks the incorrect cells in red. Actually, we're going to do it right here. So our function, event listener, for our peak, we're going to go ahead and add the timeout in that section to remove the hints after 5 seconds. Not 5 seconds, 0.5 seconds, better. 5 seconds is just way too long. You can cheat that way. Okay, so we're going to do a set timeout. You guys remember set timeout, right? Inside of our set timeout, we are going to use an anonymous function. Open and close parentheses. And then after our anonymous function, I'm going to put it at 500 milliseconds. Now you can choose how you want this to look as far as spacing, as far as making sure everything is in there correctly. But it's very, very important that you get your 500 milliseconds after the anonymous function. So I could do it like this so that I know it's after the anonymous function, close my parenthesis, and I'm good. Okay, let's go ahead and enter in our anonymous function. Okay, so over here, in my anonymous function, I want to change any cells that are pink back to white. I want to change any cells that are red back to gray, because that's how it was originally. So for my var I equals 0, I is less than puzzle cells, because I'm going to check all of my cells. Puzzle cells length I plus plus. And then inside of my for loop, I'm going to go ahead and say if puzzle cells I dot style dot background color is equal to, again, this is where it matters, RGB parenthesis 255 211 211, because that was the one that we set for it being pink. So if that happens, then set my puzzle cells I style background color back equal to RGB, and we're going to go back to white. 255, 255, 255. Semicolon. Okay, that's if they were pink. If they were red, so if the puzzle cell's background color was red. Now the red version I used, remember, it wasn't red, it wasn't straight red, it was 101, 101. So it was kind of a pink red. Then set your background back to gray, because those were the gray ones. Okay. So what that's going to do is remove the hints after 500 milliseconds from the time that this is called. So it'll go ahead and put those colors back. So now we can refresh our puzzle and check using the peak. So I'm going to go ahead and make a few of them black and hold down my Alt, make a few of them white. We know what this puzzle looks like. Leave a few of them otherwise. And we'll click peak, and in a half a second, it'll show us the pink and the dark pink, and then it'll go right back. See how it just did it for a second? So those are ones you can check. The last thing that we're going to work on in this project is display boxes. Now, you've already seen an alert box because we did that when we started with our JavaScript, but there are two other types of display boxes in JavaScript. We can use an alert, which is fine. We can also use a confirm. So an alert just gives you some information and allows you to hit OK. Cool. A confirm requires you to either pick OK or cancel. If you hit OK, the confirm box returns true. You can use that inside of an if statement to determine if someone's okay with doing something. You can also use a prompt, which is something that adds a text box. If you wanted to get a piece of information from your user, you could pop up a prompt and allow the user to type it into the text box, and then the user hits OK and the value gets passed. User hits canceled, the return value is null, and everything goes fine. Be aware, this is kind of like a pop-up, and it's kind of annoying in a website. You can do it, and you can do it in certain situations, but you want to be careful because A, people might have pop-ups turned off and you won't be able to run them anyway, and B, they can be kind of irritating. So you want to be careful about using your dialog boxes, use them appropriately, but don't spam your user. When you go to refresh the game, you want to make sure that you tell the user that they're going to lose all their progress. So in our swap puzzle, okay, that's why closing map helps. Here's our swap puzzle here. In our swap puzzle, directly after the open function line, I'm going to do an if statement because I don't want to swap my puzzle if the user doesn't want me to. And if they swap the puzzle and they were in the middle of something, it's going to go away. So let's do an if statement. And we're going to do confirm using a convert box. You will lose all your work on the puzzle. Continue. Do you want us to continue? If they want us to continue, we are going to go ahead and put everything we just did in curly braces. So the yes statement for all of this. I can just format it real quick. Everything will get shifted over. So if I say I want to swap the puzzle and I'm in the middle of working on it, so I've already done some stuff here and I go like this, it's going to plop up and it's going to say, hey, you're going to lose all your work. Are you sure? I'm going to say, oh, no, I worked hard on this game. This was really rough. And I'm going to do a couple more things. And then I'm going to say, I want to go to puzzle 2 now. And they're like, are you sure? And I'm like, yeah. And it lets me go. Same thing with any of these buttons. When you push them, they run the swap puzzle and it's going to ask, even if you haven't actually done anything. The last part that we're going to do is testing the actual solution to make sure that we got it right so that we can check against the actual solution to tell the user yes or no, did you pass? Okay. So in the setup puzzle, towards the end, we're going to go ahead and add the code to check the puzzle solution. Okay. Again, we're going to use an anonymous function. People are really funny about anonymous functions. Some people really like them. Some people really don't. It becomes a personal preference. Anonymous functions can make you have to write less code because you don't have to create a separate function, but they can also make things a little bit harder to understand. Okay. On the event listener, when the mouse goes up, on the grid, we are going to run this function and it's going to check every time. So mouse up, comma, we're going to do our function. Now, what this is going to do is say every time that you click a button, any button on here, if that button solution, when you unclick, when you let go of the mouse, will solve the puzzle, then we'll tell you solved the puzzle. So we're checking every time you click. It's not like you have to hit a button. That way it'll just pop up automatically when you finally finish it. You'll hit that last button and it'll automatically pop up and say, woohoo, good job. Okay, within our anonymous function, we're going to go ahead and add a variable called solved to true. Then we're going to go see if we actually solved it. So we're going to do a couple of loops just to check, is anything that's supposed to be filled? Is anything that's supposed to be empty? If anything is in the wrong color, we can just set it to false and break out of this. And I know I said I don't usually use break, and I don't. I would have normally done a while loop here, but in this case, the book did the for loop, and I don't want to confuse you. So we're going to do a for loop. Inside of our for loop, I'm going to say if. Because I'm going to have an and in here, I'm going to actually build two different conditionals. So my first is going to be puzzle cells I dot class name. Class name is going to get me the attribute for the class. And I'm going to check that against the word filled. So if the class name is filled and puzzle cells I dot style dot background color is not equal to, so it's supposed to be filled, RGB 101, 101, 101. Close. Okay. So if in this situation, and I can go ahead and do a new line on this just to make it a little easier to see. So if the puzzle cells class name is filled and it is not, remember this, not equal to, that means it's wrong. So that's the first one. Now, what I'm going to do is actually do another conditional option. Okay, so we had these two. Cool. I'm going to go do an or, and I'm going to do two more. So this one is going to say if puzzle cells I class name is equal to empty and parentheses puzzle cells I style background background color. I gotta make sure that's background color, not background, because background will be a calculated. We'll talk about that later. Is not equal to, I'm sorry, is equal to, if it's empty and it's equal to RGB 101, 101. So in this case, if it was supposed to be empty and it is filled, in this case, I'm going to go ahead and add one more closing parenthesis around to separate everything. I like to have parentheses around every conditional. You don't really technically need them here because it'll be understood with the and. So I have them around that, and around that, again, around the whole thing here, and then an or, and then the second option. Anyway, when I get all of these done, if any of that occurs, then I can just say solved is equal to false, because solved is equal to false. I can also break out of my for loop at this point because I don't need to go any further. If it's false, I'm not going to be solved, so it's fine. At this point, I'm just going to throw in a quick if solved is true. So if I got to the end of my solved or the end of my for loop and I never broke and I never made it false, then every one of them was correct. And I can do alert. You solved the puzzle. Exclamation mark. Woohoo. Okay. So now we can check and see if it worked. And we got it right. We can also check that if I got it wrong, so if I did something like that, that's not going to suddenly make it right. I have to go and actually make these white, and that will work. Okay, so we've checked each of the different conditions here. Okay, so that is our section on events and styles. So we were able to use events, play around with our styles, and do a couple of things for the projects. Your first project, your review project, is going to be another Japanese board game. And I know that sometimes these can be a little frustrating because you may not know the rules of the game. In this case, read the directions, like take a few minutes and read how to play the game before you even start. Don't start coding until you understand the game. Promise you that will help. Some of the functions are already built for you. So the draw function, same way it was in the tutorial, along with the check solution and show solution functions. Those are already written for you. They got those out of the way. Make sure you follow your directions. Your directions are going to be similar, but not the same as the tutorial directions because this is the review. But you want to make sure as you build your code that you test it before you submit. Make sure you play the game and the game works correctly. Things check when they're supposed to check. They don't check correctly. Whatever it is, make sure you check them before you submit. When you are finished, go ahead and submit the project on D2L. Or if you choose to put it on your website, make sure you submit something to D2L, the link to where the project is. Make sure that link is live. If I go to grade this and you only sent me a link and that link goes nowhere, I'm going to give you a 0. So be careful about that. Our Case 2 project is kind of a review site for a bookstore. So there are 2 things that you're going to be doing in this one. This is not as complicated as a game, so don't get too nervous about this. What you're going to be doing, though, is testing the code to be able to do the character count for the review. It's going to be limited to 1,000 characters. And it's going to be posting the character count as the user types. So as the user is filling in that text area, you're going to be counting how many characters are in it in JavaScript. You're also going to have an on mouse over event with the stars, and it's going to allow you to take your mouse and go over the stars and it'll fill them in as you go over them. So if you go over 3 stars, it makes the 3 stars light up. You click it and it sets it solid for that. So you're going to be doing some mouse over and mouse down events, and you're going to be checking the character count. Again, when you finish, make sure you submit it. Your last project, your Case 4, is kind of open. All of the descriptions are there. All of the things that you have to do are there, but it doesn't really walk you through how to do it. So hopefully you have understood enough about what you're doing to be able to do this project. The client in this case is creating a word search for kindergartners, which is fine. So they've got the list of words and then they're looking for specific words and you're going to be clicking them to find them. Read the requirements by the client because that's where the really important part is. Once you get into the description of do this, step 1, 2, 3, one of the steps is going to be go write the code and move on. So you really need to read the requirements. You have to do the ones that are required by the user as well, or the client, as well as following the steps. I recommend for this project, break it up into sections, test each section, read all of the directions before you start so you understand what each section does. So each of the different steps that you're going to be doing as you write your algorithm, how am I going to check this? What do I need to do for listeners? What do I need to do for handlers? How am I going to be changing things? Am I going to be changing colors? Do I want to write a function to change the colors? How do you want to do it? This is your code, and it's not going to give it to you. You need to think this through on your own. When you're finished and you're exceedingly proud of yourself, go ahead and push it up on your website and include a link to D2L so I can make sure I get to it to get it graded. Have a great week with this. Chapter 11 is new, and hopefully you can get through this with the events and the styles. We've got our team meeting. And I'll talk soon. Have a great week.